It's nearly 18 months into our solar journey, so time for some system upgrades. Hi, I'm Chris and welcome back to the channel. This time we're going to be looking at a couple of upgrades we're planning to make to our solar power setup in 2024. Before we jump in, however, we'll do a quick recap of our existing system and how it's performed over the last 1.5 years or so. One small request: if you enjoy this video or find it useful, please do hit the like button, as it helps me reach a wider audience, and consider subscribing if you want to see similar future content. Okay then. We're located in West Lancashire, in the northwest of England, not too far from Liverpool. Our system was installed in late July 2022 and comprises 2 banks of 6 Jinko Solar 375 watt panels installed on broadly east and west facing roof pitches of around 41 degrees. We have a Solis 3.6 kilowatt hybrid inverter installed in the garage, together with 2 Pylontech US 3000C batteries, giving a total capacity of 7 kilowatt hours. All told, we paid a shade under £11,000 for the system. Looking back over the last 17 months, we've generated a total of 4,583 kilowatt hours. That's a tad over 4.5 megawatt hours, with a value of £1,274. As might be expected, the system produces most power from late March through to the end of September, with the winter months of November through January being pretty poor. I guess every little helps though, as they say. Although it's of some interest to know the total figures to date, perhaps of more interest are the figures for the first full year, where we can see that we generated 3,606 kilowatt hours with a solar value of £1,006. Using a very simple calculation, that would suggest we might achieve payback sometime around year 11, depending of course on how energy prices change over that period. But of course, what would be really nice to know is how we're doing this year in comparison to last, given what the weather's been like this autumn and winter so far. Whilst we only have comparable data for the 5 months from August to December, it's not looking that promising, with solar production down 12% from 1,111 kilowatt hours in 2022 to just 977 kilowatt hours in 2023. And there's an even larger drop of 16% in solar value from around £319 to £268. Note that the reason our grid consumption jumped significantly is down to us being on the Octopus flux tariff from May 23 onwards and charging up the batteries during the early morning low rate period. Clearly, it's too soon to draw any firm conclusions on how the full 12-month performance from 23 to 24 will turn out, so we'll just have to wait and see. Instead, let's have a look at the upgrades we're planning to make. If we want to generate more power, there's really only one answer. We need to increase the size of our solar array by adding more panels. But determining how many, where to put them, and how to do this in a cost-effective way needed some thought. In a previous video, we looked at whether our 12 existing panels were in the optimum position for solar generation, considering various alternative configurations using different areas of the roof. Although we concluded that our current panels weren't in the absolute optimum configuration, the foregone output from an alternate East 10 West 2 layout was minimal at only 92 kilowatt hours per year with a value of £28 or thereabouts. Conversely, the current East 6 West 6 arrangement offered a better balance between total output power and daily generation profile, and so all in all, we're happy with the configuration we got. We also considered whether we could add some more panels. Whilst this would clearly be possible, we weren't up for investing in a completely new array, another inverter, and all the associated expense, complexity and installation hassle. We therefore looked at whether we were getting the most from our existing inverter. Could we perhaps squeeze a bit more performance from it by just expanding our current array? After some analysis, we found that we could further oversize our existing array by adding either 2 panels, giving an additional 800 watts or so, or 4 panels, giving an additional 1600 watts or thereabouts, all while still operating safely within the capabilities of our current inverter, given a maximum input power it would ever see of around 4.6 kilowatts, and then only for short peak periods, well below the recommended maximum figure of 7 kilowatts. If we sited the additional panels equally across both east and west facing roof pitches, as shown, we calculated that we could increase our solar generation by around 18% or 36% respectively. But then reality kicked in. Did we really want to go to all the trouble and expense of getting just 2 or even 4 extra panels installed, given that would require scaffolding and professional installers? Was there instead another option? Well, yes, and so what we've decided to do is to take advantage of the flat roof over our garage, onto which we should be able to install at least 2 full-size panels. As you can see, the roof is not currently in the best of condition, but we'll come back to that later. We're planning to use Referral console plus buckets to mount the panels themselves, which should keep things relatively straightforward. The existing DC cables are fed down into the garage where the inverter is located, so we'll need to determine how best to connect the new panels into the 2 strings going to the inverter. We're hoping this approach will be quite cost effective, as I'm planning to do the installation myself, and so the only costs will be those for the panels, buckets and other related materials. We should be able to arrange the panels so that they are facing almost due south, thus maximising their generation potential. And whilst we might get a little bit of shading late in the afternoon as the sun transitions around to the west, overall we think we should get a decent compromise between upgrade cost and power generated. But before we go ahead and start buying any kit, what can we expect from our additional 2 panels? Using the JRC PVGIS tool, the projected annual output for our current 12-panel 4.5 kilowatt array is 3,329 kilowatt hours, with the east-facing bank of panels generating slightly more than the west-facing, 52% versus 48%. It's worth noting, as stated earlier, that for our first 12 months of operation, the actual output was 3,606 kilowatt hours, 8% higher than projected. But be that as it may, we'll use the projected figure as the basis for determining the benefit from our proposed upgrade. Assuming we install 2 375 watt panels on the garage roof with a nearly south-facing aspect, rerunning the PVGIS analysis shows that we should get just over 650 kilowatt hours additional output each year. The total projected annual output for the system as a whole would therefore increase to 3,982 kilowatt hours, which represents an uplift of about 20%. That would suggest that we could benefit to the tune of just under £200 per year, assuming a not untypical unit cost of 30 pence per kilowatt hour. That's certainly encouraging and could offer a rapid payback if we can keep the upgrade costs down. But why 375 watt panels? Well, for now, we've just assumed that we would install the exact same panel type and capacity, although that may be easier said than done, given most currently available Jinko panels now only seem to start at 420 watts. But more on that later. Putting together a preliminary materials list isn't too difficult. 2 panels, 2 Referral console buckets with brackets and fixings, various DC cables, and some bags of ballast are all that should really be needed. For the DC cables, I'll probably go for pre-made extension cables with the MC4 connectors already fitted, rather than trying to crimp our own. Totaling it all up, and allowing for some contingency, gives a rough budget cost of £750. Delivery charges of around £100 just for 2 panels seems extortionate to my mind, so it's definitely worth me spending some time to see if I can get those down. Similarly, We're not averse to considering used panels or buckets provided they're in good condition. However, even at a figure of £680 to £750, we should achieve payback in around 3 to 4 years based on the projected output. Back to that garage roof though. It's well over 20 years since it was last replaced, and there are at least 3 areas where the surface is noticeably sagging, allowing water to pool. Whilst we're not aware of any leaks at the moment, we were already planning to get it renewed within the next couple of years. So it makes sense to do this before going ahead and installing the panels. Of course, that's if it ever stops raining. Clearly, there's a not insignificant cost to replacing the garage roof, but we're not including this in any payback calculation, as it needs doing anyway. There's not much joy in having a leaky roof, with or without solar panels. Sticking with the roof, there's a couple of items that need some further consideration before we go ahead. The first is whether the roof structure can safely accommodate the additional load of the panels, buckets and ballast. Allowing for 50 kilograms of ballast, the all-up weight for an individual panel assembly comes to around 80 kilograms, which is spread over approximately 2 square metres, giving a load of 40 kilograms per square metre, or just over £8 per square foot in old money. From what I've read so far, this should be well within the capabilities of a typical garage flat roof, but I'm going to do some more investigations to be sure. The second is what type of roofing material to go for. Currently, it's a traditional torched-on bitumen roofing felt, and going for the same again would probably be the lowest cost and still outlast me. Longer lasting alternatives, though usually at a higher cost, include EPDM rubber roofing membrane or GRP roofing. These may well be overkill given that Renusol state there are no point loads from the console bucket onto the roof surface. However, it would be good to know whether there's likely to be any impact on the typical lifespan of any of these roofing options. I plan to do some more research on this, but if anyone has any experience or knowledge of this, please do comment. In an ideal world, we'd just install 2 more panels of the exact same type as our existing ones. However, as mentioned earlier, despite it only being 18 months or so since they were installed, getting hold of those now looks likely to be a challenge. This doesn't present an insurmountable problem, we just need to identify a panel with similar specifications and ratings. When mixing panels of a different type, whether that be manufacturer, range or wattage, the first thing to be aware of is whether they're connected in series or in parallel, as this determines whether to match their current rating or voltage rating. As our existing 375 watt panels are connected in series, 6 per string as shown, we need to try to match on the current rating, with the rating of the new panels needing to be close to or ideally a little bit greater. Looking at the specifications for our existing panels and focusing on the standard test condition column for simplicity, we can see the max voltage and max power current are 36.8 volts and 10.19 amps respectively. When multiplied together, these give the maximum power or Pmax figure of 375 watts. Now, as an example, if we were to stick with the Jinko Tiger all black product range, if for no other reason than keeping a similar visual appearance, then the Tiger Neo N-Type 54HL4-B series with wattages in the range of 400 to 440 watts could be a possibility, currently retailing around the £100 mark. Selecting a panel in the middle of that range, i.e. the 420 watt model, we see that it has max voltage and max power current of 32.04 volts and 13.11 amps respectively, which give the Pmax figure of 420 watts when multiplied together. With a max power current of 13.11 amps, which is around 28% greater than the 10.19 amps for our existing panels, this initially looks promising. This is because we wouldn't want the new panel to have a max power current lower than the 10.19 amps, as that would constrain the current flowing through the 6 existing panels and hence reduce their effective power output. However, because the 6 existing panels are limited to 10.19 amps, the current flowing through the new panel will also be limited to 10.19 amps, as shown. What this means is that the maximum power figure of 420 watts for the new panel will never be achieved. Instead, multiplying the max voltage of 32.04 volts for the new panel and the actual current flowing through it of 10.19 amps gives us an actual Pmax figure of 327 watts, which is 13% lower than our existing panels and 23% lower than the nominal figure of 420 watts. So although the new panel won't impact the performance of the existing panels, it certainly won't deliver the output we would first expect. Whilst this wouldn't be an absolute disaster, it is a bit disappointing and would certainly push out the payback calculation a little. It's apparent that this potential new panel has a noticeably lower max voltage than the existing panels, i.e. 32.04 volts compared to 36.8 volts. I guess this lower voltage higher current ratio is down to the design of the new panel. What all this means is that it's definitely worth spending a little more time looking at a wider range of alternative panels to try to get a better match of ratings that don't impact on the effective power as much. In addition to choosing which panels to install, the other thing we need to consider is how to connect them up to the inverter. I'd initially assumed I'd just put one new panel on each string, so ending up with 7 panels on each string for a balanced DC input at the inverter. Having thought about it a little more, however, I'm concerned that as we start to get shading on the 2 new panels as the sun tracks west, the output from the existing west-facing panels on string 1 might end up being dragged down by the new south-facing panel on that string. I'm therefore now thinking that I'd connect both new panels into the east-facing bank, so ending up with 8 panels on the east/south-facing string 2, with the 6 existing panels still on the west-facing string 1. Although this presents an unbalanced DC input to the inverter, as far as I can tell, there appears no disadvantage to doing this, and it's within the capabilities of the inverter. Again, if anyone has any views on this, please do comment. And of course, as you've all probably guessed by now, the other upgrade just has to be additional battery storage capacity. After all, where are we going to store all that lovely extra energy? More seriously though, adding more storage capacity has been on the cards for some time. And knowing what we know now, we'd have certainly gone for greater storage capacity when we initially purchased the system. So what are the options available to us? Our current system utilises 2 Pylon-Tech US 3000C battery modules, each one having a storage capacity of 3.5 kilowatts, giving us the total of 7 kilowatts. As far as I can tell, our Solis inverter doesn't have the ability to support batteries from different manufacturers at the same time. But even if that had been the case, we'd probably have stuck with Pylon-Tech anyway, for simplicity's sake. We're therefore faced with choosing one or more modules from the current Pylon-Tech range, starting with the US 2000C at 2.4 kilowatt hours, the 3000C at 3.5 kilowatt hours, or the daddy of them all, the US 5000 at 4.8 kilowatt hours. In an ideal world, it would be great to be able to store every single watt of power that the panels generate. But given that the batteries don't come free, and the handyman at home budget isn't inexhaustible, we need to balance how much capacity we like against the cost. Looking back over 2023, I found that our maximum generation in a single day was 27.5 kilowatt hours in mid-June. To store that amount of power, we'd need to quadruple our battery storage capacity, which is just unrealistic. Perhaps a more reasonable figure to aim for was the maximum average daily generation of 20 kilowatt hours across June. But even that would require us to treble our battery storage capacity. Averaging across the full year gave a rather uninspiring daily figure of 9.5 kilowatt hours, and so I eventually homed in on the figure of 15 kilowatt hours, which seemed a reasonable compromise between capacity and cost. So which combination of modules to go for to achieve 15 kilowatt hours? However, before I could decide, the missus just told me to stop faffing about and order a single US 5000. Well, okay, that would only give us 11.8 kilowatt hours, but it still represents a 70% increase, so isn't to be sniffed at. The other benefit that comes with the additional US 5000 is a more than doubling in the charge-discharge current capability from 74 amps to 154 amps. But what are the actual practical benefits we hope to get from this upgrade? Well, I think most people watching this video will be familiar with the principle of charging the battery when solar generation is at its maximum, usually around midday, and discharging it earlier or later in the day when your energy consumption is typically higher but there's less solar around. With our original 7 kilowatt of storage capacity, we've quite often seen our battery discharge down to the 20% level by early evening, whereupon we need to start importing from the grid. For reference, 20% is the level at which we have the inverter set to not discharge the battery any further. Clearly, the point at which we hit the 20% mark depends on how much solar there was during the day. For example, on a sunny summer's day, we typically wouldn't reach that point until around 10 p.m. But on a cloudy, grey autumn or winter's day, we'd be lucky to make it much past 6 or 6:30 p.m. With a larger capacity battery, we can store more solar generation, so it will take longer to discharge. This pushes the point at which we hit the 20% level much further into the evening and possibly all the way through to early morning. We can thus save money by completely avoiding the need to import from the grid during the evening, or at worst, at least reduce the amount we need to import. Which of course leads us on to the second key benefit to us of a larger battery. That's the ability to make better use of our Octopus flux tariff. With a larger capacity battery, we can import more energy during the 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. low rate period, thus paying less for every unit of electricity we subsequently use later in the day. Taking it a step further, we can also choose to re-export back to the grid some of that stored energy, whether solar generated or from the low rate import. Doing that during the peak rate period will result in a healthy premium. Now, it's fair to say that the benefits of incorporating battery storage into your solar energy system are fairly well known and have been covered in many videos here on YouTube, including some of my own. Nothing I've said in the last few minutes then is thus particularly new. Having an appropriate amount of storage capacity is perhaps the key point here. And as I said earlier, knowing what we know now, we'd have certainly gone for greater capacity from day one. But as they say, we are where we are, and so we're hoping with this planned upgrade we'll see some real positive benefits. So can we calculate the payback period for our planned upgrades? Starting with the addition of 2 more panels and making lots of assumptions, it looks like we should get our upgrade cost of £750 repaid in around 4 years, following which we'll be cash flow positive. What effect does that have on the payback period overall? Well, assuming that the upgrade is done around 18 months after the system was initially installed, then the net effect is to reduce the payback period from 11 years to about 9.5 years, which I think is pretty good. Now, there's all sorts of assumptions and factors that aren't considered in such a simple payback calculation. But I think we can be fairly confident that adding a couple of extra panels into the existing system will prove worthwhile. But what about the battery? Well, after spending a few hours trying to calculate this and time myself in all sorts of knots in Excel, I ended up with payback periods anywhere from 4 years to 25 years. And this was even after watching this video by Gary Does Solar. So, rather than spend yet more time trying to come up with some convoluted calculation that's probably wrong anyway, I'm just going to take the view that increasing our battery storage capacity is a good thing to do and leave it at that. Of course, the obvious question is what's the timescale for making these upgrades? Well, time to fess up. We've actually already done the battery upgrade. After all, when the missus gives you permission to spend money, it pays not to hang around. If you're interested in seeing how simple it was to add in the new US 5000 battery and what a difference it's made to our energy use profile, make sure you're subscribed so you get notified when I upload that video. As for when we're going to add the 2 further panels, it all depends on when we get the garage roof done. Likely sometime in early spring or thereabouts, I would think, if it ever stops raining. I'll be doing a full video on the process, which I hope you'll find interesting. One last comment on the battery upgrade. It's worth noting that the UK government is planning to abolish VAT on the purchase of batteries for addition to or extending existing solar installations, with effect from the 1st of February 2024. Clearly that's very good news, and dare I say, well overdue. Whilst it's too late for us in respect of the US 5000 we already purchased, maybe it means I stand a better chance of convincing the boss that we should buy another. 16.6 kilowatt hours, here we come. Maybe. Well, there you have it, our solar upgrade plans for 2024. Hope you found them interesting. Thanks for watching. Please do like, comment and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Cheers, and hope to see you again next time.